paní, že máš...
Ladies and gentlemen, the sessions are starting. Please proceed to the rooms.
Okay, so I don't know if that's all the participants that want to take part in this panel. If not, we also welcome latecomers. So let's just start. Thank you for joining us at Prague Media Point, where we help foster the media's work for the public good. And the panel that you're attending right now is called Investigative Reporting or Investigative Journalism, Leading Examples from Central Europe and the Western Balkans. The panel is co-produced in collaboration with the International Visegrad Fund. And let me please draw your attention to the fact that we are being streamed live by the Czech press agency Czech TV. As the umbrella topic of this conference is what's working, we are going to focus on the conditions and the challenges and the possibilities of investigative reporting in the time of social media, of more elaborate and complex political marketing, but also on the technical, let's say, facilities or conditions of the investigative reporting. How is it being done? How can it be done these days? And it's my utmost pleasure to welcome guests from both Central Europe and the Western Balkans here. Let me start with ladies first. To my right-hand side, Dragana, Zarkovic, Obradovic. Hello. Dragana is country director from the Serbian office of the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. And you will hear about her more after I'm done with my with my prologue here. To my left-hand side, Marek Wollner, editor-in-chief of investigative reporting in public service Czech TV. Hello. And the program Reportéři ČT, as you may know. And to my right-hand side, Tamás Bodoky, editor-in-chief of the media outlet Atlatszo. Atlatszo. Okay, my Hungarian is far from perfect, so I'm sorry. You will also be able to hear more about what Tamás is doing when I'm finished. As the title of the panel is Leading Examples from Central Europe and the Western Balkans, we are also going to focus more on the specific situation in this region. And of course, you're very welcome to ask questions and leave your comments in the final Q&A session that will last about 20 minutes. So be ready, pay attention, and do participate. You're very welcome to join our debates. And last but not least, I hope you will enjoy the debate. And now I'm just passing the floor to my guest. I will ask you to introduce yourself shortly one more time, and also to introduce the flagship program or flagship outlet of investigative reporting that you're dealing with and working with. Thank you. So. Yes, Dragana.
Okay, so hello everyone. It is really a pleasure to be here and to be recognized as one of leading examples of investigative journalism from Western Balkans. It is quite flattering, especially if you're coming from country as Serbia is, like rather small country that has thriving investigative journalism scene. And I will really use the floor to to comment on the fact that like relatively small country as Serbia has journalists and investigative centers that got like the Knight Award that my colleague Stevan Dojčinović got this year, then European Press Prize or the Global Shining Light Award that Birn got like last year. So that basically means that investigative journalism is supported and is recognized in Serbia, which is the good news. The bad news is that the conditions in which we are working is far from good, and that the response of institutions on the thing that we are doing is definitely not enough, and that is something that is shaking public trust in investigative journalism. Nevertheless, that it is recognized as the only, I would say, barrier to the propaganda and to the distorted reality that is served to the people through mainstream media. But I'm here actually today with two hats. Like one is as director of Birn Serbia that has investigative team of for journalists and one colleague that is specialized also in data journalism. So I'm glad that it will be also one of the topics we will be tackling upon today. But also Birn Serbia is part of Birn regional network. Like that is the network that is present in 9 countries of Balkan region and is publishing analytical publication Balkan Insight that probably some of you have heard of. It's in English language, so it is much more international. And Birn network actually started in 2007 after Institute for the War and Peace Reporting, after the turbulent period of the wars in the Balkans, has decided to shut down their operations in the Balkan and move forward. So the people that were working for that network, like 6 of them, thought that it is worth continuing their job because they saw there are so many things that needs to be fixed on the ground. And actually the gap that existed at that point was in the regional cooperation. And that is something that Birn is known about. That is something that is very much helping and feeding our investigative work on a local level, but also on the regional level. I think that is something that Birn is recognized of. Because in the situation when you have small saturated markets, when you have quarreling political elites, when you have so much political burden, like journalists are those that can bridge the gap. And I would actually like to talk more about it like during the panel, but I think for the introduction this is probably enough.
And just to make it clear, your outlet is online media, or do you have also other outcomes?
No, it is just online. So both Balkan Insight and the Birn Serbia outlets are both online. One is in English and is analytical and is covering entire region, but it's also covering part of like Visegrad 4 countries. I can also talk partially about it, like why we thought it is needed to go beyond the Balkans, where story actually took us, and in Serbia also, but it's in local language. It is in Serbian. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think it's enough for the start. Let me proceed with Tamás.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm a journalist since 20 years, and I run the Atlatszo, an NGO for investigative journalism, since 2011. So Atlatszo means transparent in Hungarian, and the idea was to make Hungarian public life more transparent, especially public spending, because Hungary is famous for political corruption and biased spending of public money. Unfortunately, since 2011, there are much more problems raised. So I think we can be a flagship investigative outlet in the country with 6 journalists, because there are not much free media left. And there is a huge pro-government media conglomerate. So basically the government decided to capture the media sector, and this means that they occupy the public service media channels, they buy up private media, they start private media, they fund this media by taxpayers' money, and they openly declare that the job or the role of the journalist is not to control the powers or not to be watchdog. So this pro-government media is totally uncritical towards the government, and it only investigates the opposition and critics and so on. So we at Atlatszo, we are some of the remaining outlets which are still critical of the government and try to do some level of watchdog work on how this government operates. Atlatszo was started in 2011. The basic idea was to publicize freedom of information, to make it more popular, because before 2011 a lot of Hungarians didn't even know what freedom of information legislation means and what you can do with this. So a couple of journalists and lawyers filed these freedom of information requests. And one of our first projects was to start a freedom of information request generator to make it available, to make this opportunity available for any citizen. So they can register at our website and can start file freedom of information requests themselves. So it became quite popular. So it's now more than 13,000 requests were filed through this system. But this is only one of our projects, and we have several more. And I guess I will have the opportunity to talk about that later.
Hopefully, and also about the situation in Hungary. Thank you for now. And last but not least, Marek Wollner.
Hello, thank you for having me here. I am editor-in-chief for the Czech TV, which is a public broadcaster in my country. And I'm doing investigative journalism in a program called Reportéři ČT. This year, it's 2019. We have celebrated the 15th anniversary of our program, despite the fact that we brought down one government. We're still broadcasting our program, and we have every Monday evening our program on the channel 1, which is the most viewed channel in the Czech TV. As I presume, maybe we are the last one public TV in region which have such a critical program, and during this time, of course, we face a lot of pressures from politicians who doesn't like our program and who would like to even pressure on the Czech TV to or cancel this program or change this program, of course. And we have a lot of enemies in politics, but we still there. And I would say that the Czech media landscape has been changing for the last decades lots. At the beginning of 90s, according to the Reporters Without Borders, the Czech Republic was on the 10th place, I think, in the ranking of them, and now we are 40th. So when I say that we're still doing maybe a little bit better than the other countries from the region, I have to state as well that the situation is worsening, and the pressure for the journalists is, I would say, every day almost worse. And crucial time will be the next year, when the Board of Governors, which is kind of board which support the Director General to govern the public station. So 6 of them will be replaced by the new governors, and that would be crucial for our TV, because we have, I have to say, very reasonable and wise people who support the independent journalism in the boards of governors, and they are there from the past elected period. So we will see how it will really evolve, and I hope that we will survive again. But I'm not completely sure. According to me, I am a journalist since 1992. I was one of the students who participated on the Velvet Revolution as well, so that was for me really, I would say, a dream which came true, because at the beginning of 1989, we as a journalist or student of journalism made a big transparent on the school. We would like to write the truth, and until now I can say that I didn't how to say it, zradit. I didn't betray this program, so I hope that it will remain.
Thank you very much. And let me open the debate with a question that refers to both your experience, long time experience in journalism. So both the media landscape and also the time has changed turbulently in the past years. How has it changed for investigative reporting? Is it now easier to do it? I mean, both in terms of technique and sharing and distribution, but also in terms of getting the information. What's your experience? Marek, maybe could you start?
I think the situation is, according to that, is quite similar. Of course, we have we live in a digital era, which makes things different. Journalists doesn't need to run as they did before. They have a lot of information in their computers when they can really operate the public information very well. So we have less walking on the streets, and we have more studying or analyzing public documents. In my country, we have a lot of good laws which make it easier for the journalists to get this information. But this is just a technical point of view, and I think that this is not such a big difference. What I feel, and my colleagues said it as well, what I feel what is really different is that we have a kind of pro-government media, and those pro-governmental media, they want to kind of smear us. They would like to take a credibility from us, publishing very often not truth about us, or just opinions which are not based on facts. They are doing kind of smearing campaigns against the trustworthy media, and that's what is happening here. I don't know, at least 5, 6, 7 years in a big amount. And I think that this is something new for the journalists, because they have to come to terms with kind of disregard of the public, which was not at the past so big. Yeah. So for my program, I was used to that people from a lot of specters of society, they liked our program, and I would say now that it has been really changed, and we are more for more educated people who are not so disoriented from these pro-governmental and, I would say, emotional outlets.
Mm-hmm. What's your experience, Dragana?
Well, I agree with everything that the colleague said, so I won't repeat it, because in Serbia situation is pretty much the same. I would say like worse, probably, like for sure worse than in Czech Republic. Like Czech Republic, when you compare media scenes, is doing much better than Serbia. And I will just use one illustrative example, that today Serbia has media sustainability index same as it was in 90s during the civil war that is happening happening in that country. So that is quite like illustrative fact about how bad the media situation is. I think it is probably more similar to Hungarian than to Czech. And just the fact that Czech TV has investigative journalism program, the one that can bring down the government, is something that we cannot imagine to happen in our country. So I will just pick it up from there and add like to what colleague just said. It is different in terms of that we have better technical possibilities. The journalists are more, I would say, connected. But what is the same and what is, I would say, missing in today's journalism are people. And just one example about it, like Birn is since 2018 following the story about the arms trade that is happening in Serbia and that the father of our Minister of Interior is involved in. So we've published a lot of information, a lot of data, analysis, contracts, everything. But the story that made the biggest fuss and was the most read was the interview with the whistleblower. So basically at the moment when the government realized that information from factory is leaked, they arrested a whistleblower and the guy was in prison and we managed to interview him. And people are essentially interested in people. So that is for us like the big lesson, because investigative journalists sometimes tend to forget that and concentrate on data, on contracts, on technical stuff. But journalism is essentially about the storytelling, about telling the story, and the stories of people are the most interesting to the people. So that is one thing that I would say is missing. The other thing is the role of social network, which they play in this game. For us as digital media, they are immensely important because that's our only distribution channel that we have at the moment. Because all the mainstream media is captured, we don't have any distribution channels, so we rely quite a lot on social media. But it also makes us vulnerable on many levels. Like one of them is the journalists are primary targets of all attacks on social media. And these are not attacks by ordinary people, these are attacks by basically people that are working for the governments. Like they are people that are on public money payrolls and their job is to distort like public discourse on social networks, and journalists are their primary target. So that is thing number one. And the thing number two is that we are vulnerable in our relationship with social networks, because we sometimes have the situation that our content is taken down because these same bots or trolls are reporting us to the social networks, and for them it is much easier to take down our content than to go into like doing due diligence and checking that we are proper media operation that works in the public interest. And that is an issue that I'm always raising. Like for them, we are considered to be the small market. But then I think it shouldn't be measured based on the money, but based on the fact that in the generation from 16 to 29 years, 90% of Serbian people are on social networks and informing them through social networks. So that is huge responsibility of them as well, to create environment in which they can be like a normal public debate and a media that are working in public interest can have their voice being heard.
And the experience from Hungary?
I agree with my colleagues that the digital age has made investigative journalism much easier because we have access to various databases, public information through the internet. We can share our content on social networks. So like in Serbia, in Hungary, we are also cut off by the mainstream media. So when, like a few years ago, when Atlatszo started, we still had some TV channels interested in our work and picking up and following up on our stories. That's not really happening anymore. So it's only the social media we can count on. But on the other hand, this state capture of mainstream media makes distribution very difficult. So what happens is that there is a small echo bubble who knows a few 100,000 people who follow our website and social media channels and who know about our findings. And there are millions of people who are fed by the mainstream media, and they will never get a word about our research, except when we also have these smear campaigns. So that's the typical reaction by the government-controlled media if there is any scandal dig up by journalists, then they start to attack the outlet, and that happened to us last year when we exposed that the government is using a secret private jet and a luxury yacht on the Adriatic, and then they didn't talk about this topic, but they started to attack our outlet. So and also access to information became more and more problematic, so we are blacklisted. If we ask a government institution, if we ask a ministry simple questions, they just don't answer. They deny handing out public data. We need to go to court sometimes to sue for public data, but then that can take months. So basically, the government is doing everything to make our work more difficult.
Talking about social media, I know that it's pretty much a cliche that only young people are using social media, but let's say they use them in a way that also changes consuming the media. So is it crucial for you to focus on young people, and are actually young people interested in investigative reporting, or is it a generational thing that because it's like lengthy text or more complex reporting, and you have to have the context? So do you also think of the young generation, like breeding up young viewers and young readers to gain their support?
You know, before my program started, they had advertising about some Viagra pills or something. So you can then answer the question: who is watching the program? What is the aim group of people? Yeah, we have usually people over 40 and highly educated people, more with the college, and some of course with the what's the name of it? Střední škola. Secondary, no. High school. So I think that it's a natural thing that young people are not so focused on basically politics in my country and in high-level journalism. Of course, that the social media is changing it a little bit, but anyway, I think that young people on the Facebook or Instagram, Facebook is old school, yeah, it's not for the young people. Instagram and things, they are not made for investigative journalism. So, yeah, I don't say that it's so pessimistic, but I would say that the investigative journalism is not basically aimed to the young people. When we have some kind of topics, you can see that there is maybe bigger viewership of the young people, but not generally.
The experience from Hungary when you are holding the microphone.
Okay, so we realized that the traditional way of investigative journalism, so doing a huge text with hundreds of names and company names, simply doesn't work anymore. So we produce less and less these very complex, long form stories, and we decided to look for how corruption can be interesting, and one of the aspects is how what becomes from the money once it's stolen, because some people amass a lot of money and then they go out and buy shiny things. So they buy castles or expensive real estate or very expensive cars or even private airplanes or yachts, and these are things what are interesting. So we use the camera drone and we use photojournalists and video journalists to go out and look for these hidden assets. And then we show this on our website, and we do a drone footage on Instagram, and that's something what can grab the attention of the young people as well.
And Dragana, do you have both young audience and young reporters? Or,
yeah, we have quite young reporters. Like we have older reporters, of
it's
course.
attractive for young people to do
but it is quite attractive to young people. Like in general, let me be honest, journalism is not attractive job anymore. Like at least in my country, it is quite precarious job. Like it is not well paid. You are under the public spotlight. If you try to do the job the way you think it should be done, like you can have consequences and so on. And anyway, I would say that our political elites have done everything to picture like a journalism as job that is not really decent, yeah? Like if you're a decent person, you wouldn't be a journalist, yeah? Like you wouldn't be a politician, I would say, maybe. But they changed the game, so now like journalists are those that are not decent. So, but there are always these people, like I was one of them when I started, when I was young, that have this drive, yeah, like to fight for the truth, that take pride in that are not actually working only for the money. And we have such a people in our organization. So I would say one of the best things that Bern was in position to do is to have trainings for young journalists. So we have regional trainings, we have local trainings, we have fellowships programs that are immensely important for like breeding this new generation of people. Summer School of Investigative Journalism. So these are all the places where we are actually recruiting new people into our organization. So they are also bringing new ways of treating information and producing content. So we are present on all social networks, I have to say. Like it's also Facebook, but colleague is totally right. Like I say, for my generation, internet was Google. Yeah, like for my son's generation, that is YouTube or Instagram, and for those in between, it's Facebook. So it is something like that. Like people are not treating internet as the initial idea was, that it is open worldwide web, like it is hijacked in a way by these big companies, and that very much influenced journalistic business, like how we produce information, but also how we distribute it, because we are not in charge of distribution in that way anymore. So in that sense, that puts big pressure on media. Also, like financial, but also in human resources. Because if you have one information, you have to be able to present it in many different ways, on a website, on Instagram, on YouTube, like so that you are present everywhere. And that puts like a lot of costs to media organizations. That is also something that should be mentioned, yeah?
Yes, you wanted to react?
I would like to add something. When I started my career in 1992, I remember that journalism in my country was one of the most popular and prestigious professions. We were among the first 5, maybe, and now we are on the other side. We are really, like, I think, only politicians are less popular than we are, yeah? And it says a lot. I don't think that many young people want to go to the profession which is really so badly evaluated by the public. And it's badly evaluated, of course, because we have a lot of tabloids, we have a lot of disinformation and things like that, but it's very often attacked by the politicians as well. So you have to be kind of a strange person to be a journalist, and I think, 3 of us, we are a little bit strange, and that's why we can understand very well each other. But yeah, you need to be really like prepared for the uncomfortable life. And as I know from the young generation, they would change. They would go for different kind of living than. We were really lucky to have a freedom for journalism, because that was after the communism era, and that was something really big. They, I think, feel that it's just normal in my country, and it's a big mistake because they can lose it.
Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm asking the question about young both consumers of investigative journalism and young investigative journalists to remember the legacy and the life of Jan Kuciak, a Slovakian journalist that was shot last year. That was a very shocking experience. So I wonder what your first thoughts were, I mean, on the personal level, but also about the future of investigative reporting in this region or in your country. Like, did it what were your first thoughts? Because it's a very extreme event that happened, but you're all talking about being harassed and threatened and ignored. So I'm very much interested in how you cope with it, and what's your strategy for the future in your field?
Okay, I can start with this one. So for me, honestly, it was a bit surprised to see how far the investigation about the murder of Jan Kuciak went into like the very top political structures. But that's probably because I'm not from Slovakia. So that was my first reaction. And basically, I recognized the model that exists in my country. Like, honestly, we are a mafia state. Yeah, like mafia goes like very far into the political structures. But I think it will be much harder to do it again. Because everybody is under the spotlight now. Like if in one country of EU as Slovakia is that have happened, I'm quite sure that in our country, like politicians in that sense are under like a much bigger spotlight. So in that sense, like I wouldn't say. We talked quite a lot about it in our newsroom, like if people are feeling protected or not protected. So, like being very publicly an enemy of the regime and of political elites, as we are in Serbia, because they call us like almost on daily basis, like a traitors, enemies of the people, people that are working against the government. So I think they would be primary suspects if anything happens to us. And in that sense, I think the situation in my country is different than it was in Slovakia. But it showed us actually how far this organized crime goes. And it showed us basically that we should work much more, you know, as united front, as working together. Because our political elites and our organized crime doesn't know the borders. Like they work cross-border all the time. Like money is going from one country to another, and we should work much more together. So that was that would be my appeal. Like after.
So you feel more safe in a way because you think that nobody will repeat this action, or that it has not become a precedent?
At least in context of my country, because I speak only from the situation in Serbia.
Okay. And neighboring Hungary, and I mean neighboring Slovakia.
I was quite shocked because when I'm asked about the situation in Hungary, I always tell people, oh, that we are not Russia, we get smeared and they call us names. We are also called traitors and unpatriotic and serving foreign interests and so on. This is very typical Soros and so on. But I keep telling like foreign journalists that this is not Russia. I don't get beaten. I don't get shot. I'm not physically threatened. I don't have to hire bodyguards for the journalists and so on. And then I realized that if it can happen in Slovakia, it could easily happen in Hungary as well. And in the current climate, even if it's not the government or the secret service or not something high level, but people are encouraged to hate the journalists. So really, this governmental propaganda machine encourages to hate journalists who are liars and fake news producers. So that's enough. One crazy person is enough to attack a journalist because on this constant propaganda against journalists.
Have you taken any precautions or any measurements to protect yourself?
Well, we try to do something, but it's not much. We have these call recorders on the mobile. So if anyone calls you and this threatens you, we have a record. We have it on record, so we can report it to the police or we can publish it or whatever. But I mean, there is not much to do. There is not much to do to protect yourself, and especially you can't protect your reputation against a governmental propaganda machine.
Marek, what is your experience? How to cope and how to resist the political pressure and also Jan Kuciak death?
I remember Jan Kuciak. He was. We knew Jan Kuciak. We collaborated with him on many cases when we came to Slovakia. He was always there, very obliging to help us with to provide us with information. He was never selfish. I have to say, me and we journalists are very often like keeping our information because we need to be exclusive. And he was so easygoing, and he was so really. So nice guy that we were really sad. Personally, really sad. He was such a decent man. But second thing was that I was really positively surprised by the reaction of the Slovak public, because what Slovak did with his death was some really good example of how to react with courage, and they hit the streets and hit the squares and said, no, this was something we will not tolerate anymore. And that was a very important message to all powerful people in Slovakia. And I think that it really started to change the atmosphere in Slovakia. We can see that the Prime Minister was pushed to step down, the Minister of Interior, the police president, and people like other powerful people, they really started to investigate the case properly. And now we have not only the murders, but also the man who was behind that. And now we see much more information how the government really worked with the man who was behind the murder of Jan Kuciak. So I don't want to be a kind of spiritual, but his death was something what really helped to change atmosphere in Slovakia, and I think it will never be forgotten.
Political pressure in general on you, because you're one of the prominent moderators and one of the prominent faces of Czech TV who are constantly being attacked, and how high is your salary, and why don't you just get lost, so to say, from the screen? So what's your strategy? What's your recipe to stay in the media for so long?
I don't know. You have to learn how to live with that. When it really started 5-6 years ago, I was quite shocked, and I was fortunate enough that we have now 6 weeks holidays, and I just took books which I never read before. I got this book from my girlfriend 20 years ago, and I thought, oh my God, why would I read this book? It was a book called Meditation. And then I started to meditate, really. Funny thing for a journalist, we are very pragmatic, I would say, but it helped me a little bit to understand of my feelings, and now I am more prepared for these attacks. You have to, like everything, get to accustomed to it if you want to survive, and so it's less sensitive for me now, and I'm the best way is to make a fun from that. We have one politician say sometimes to answer him as well, like we have him because it's from the politicians who are male, or very often they're all only male. So so you have to make a fun from them because they are not so clever, and it really keeps me survive. Yeah.
Anybody wants to comment how to resist political pressure or how to do the daily hygiene after your job, Tamás?
I agree with making fun, so we also sometimes we make funny memes and make jokes about the situation because if you take it very seriously, it just tears you down.
But that is part of their strategy, actually, yeah, because they want to put you in a situation that you cannot, that you don't feel good doing your job anymore. So of course you have to, make mockery of that because you have to save your head. But also what I think is quite important not to get hooked into that, yeah? Because at least like I will speak now from the situation in Serbia, they are making you be their political target, like political enemy. And they always say, we are not politicians, like we are journalists. We are doing our job that's different from politics. Like don't make me be political opposition to you, because I'm not, yeah? So if you stand on that position like long enough, they get tired in a way. Like I've seen many of my colleagues being hooked into that political debate and turning basically into political figures, not journalists anymore. And that then puts them in situation that they can be easily disregarded, yeah, as journalists, and they can always say, yeah, but he's against us. Well, no, we are not against anyone. We are here for the public, yeah? We are here to report. So I would say that's also like quite good position to keep.
And while you still keep the microphone, let me use Jan Kuciak and his methods. As far as I know them, I didn't know him personally, but he was more like a data journalist. He wasn't really a reporter that was on the spot and asking with the microphone, but he was more analyzing the data. Data journalism and investigative journalism. In what way is this combination productive and helpful? And in what way it is not?
Okay, so I would say data journalism is very like a special trade of journalism. You really need to have specific set of skills to be good in data journalism. First, like collecting information, then analyzing them, like knowing how to read them, but then also presenting them. Because if you don't know how to present them, it gets like really boring read. So we are doing data journalism quite a lot. We started doing it when actually not so many information were in public domain. So we used a lot this Freedom of Information Act, like we were sending requests, getting the information, putting them in sheets, analyzing them, and so on and so forth. In the meantime, our government started like a program of basically open governance, like publishing information, but not the important information, like really information that they think are quite safe to publish. So we are still relying, I would say, more on access to information law than on the data that are available online, unlike in other countries like UK or Scandinavian countries where colleagues really have like a lot of data to dig in. But I would say that even the data that they consider to be like a safe can tell you a lot about the social topics. So if you're not interested exclusively in organized crime and corruption that you cannot find online. Like you have to rely heavily on people, on insiders, on reporting with the people, and contracts that you sometimes get, sometimes don't. For some other topics, it is like hugely important. And I will just use one example of the law in Serbia that was adopted for like mothers, like subsidies that they were getting. Like the law was changed, and the government, populistic as it is, was saying that the law is better than it was before, that mothers are getting more money and so on. But we analyzed actually these data and realized that the law is better only for one group of women, and for all the others that they are actually getting less money. So they thought it's like a safe bet. Even with these informations, we were quite struggling. And in order to corroborate them and to verify the information that we had like crowdsourcing campaign. Like we produced a questionnaire and were sharing it on the internet, asking like new mothers to fill in this calculator so that we can get the information on how much money they're getting now. So it helped us hugely to connect to the public, to raise important like social issue, that after that like a lot of political parties, but also women organizations, NGOs took over advocating for the changes in that law. So it was one really good example how data journalism can be used for, let's say, a social good. But when it comes to corruption, organized crime, it is more like a sensitive topics. We are still not in position to prove anything using solely data journalism.
Mm-hmm. How about Marek and Tamás? Do you ever use data journalism, and in what way?
Yes, we do use data journalism. I think it's very important because the Hungarian press is overly opinionated, so it's 90% opinions and opinions against totally different opinions, and the facts are often lacking from the discourse. So what we do, we try to dig out facts and prove facts, and one of this is like collecting public procurement data, how much is spent by which company, and so on and so on. And sometimes it results in really impressive stories, like the government's communication was all about how bad the EU is and problematic the EU is, and the EU wants to conquer us, and so on and so on. And then it turns out that we could prove that like 83% of a certain pro-government oligarchs, all public contracts came from EU subsidies. So basically, while they are against the EU, the businessmen, business tycoons supporting the government are getting rich on EU funds, and these things are very important to research and then it is a lot of research by data journalists to prove how these numbers are.
Do you want to react, or shall we move to another question? I wonder if data journalism can actually discover a problem or give an incentive to start an investigative reporting, or do you use it as a backup or to put the context to your findings?
I think in TV journalism it's a little bit different. We need pictures. That's almost the same important as the facts. But facts matters. Facts is something which really matters. As you said, that we are over opinionated in our countries. We have a lot of today. When someone lacks facts, he said, "This is my opinion." Yeah, despite the fact that opinion is, bullshit. Yeah. And somebody stresses right to have this opinion without facts. So we are focused on facts. That's the main thing, and not to be so theoretical. This week we have a lot of work because our Prime Minister has quite a difficult week. He's indicted again with linkage with abusing of European funds for his kind of cottage, quite big. 50 million, and just the fund 50 million. The cottage is a little bit more expensive. And he got the audit for conflict of interest. He was again found in the conflict of interest as we broadcast more than 5 years, because his companies are doing business with the state, and they are taking money from the state and from the EU as well, like as subsidies. So this is the topic we cover, and we will broadcast on Monday.
My last question, and then I leave the floor to you, to the audience, is the use of new devices such as camera in the glasses or GoPros hidden in the hairdos, and I don't know, phone intercepting and other gray zone ways of getting the information. Do you ever discuss it prior to using it? So do you have, let's say, some guidelines or a theoretical frame when to use it, when not to use it, how to deal with it? Or do you always do it ad hoc? Like, how do we get this information? Let's try the camera glass, for example. Marek.
No, we use it very rare. It's not very usual. We use it only in situation where we cannot get some person on a camera, and we need him really. And that's I don't know, maybe once a half of year, because we want to be transparent. We have, of course, like codex in my TV stations that we have to say hello. We are going to broadcast you. Like that's something which a little bit limits our situation, but we don't care because we just need the information. If someone wants to avoid the information, it's information as well. He doesn't want to give the information because there is something to hide. It sometimes says a lot, but there are some specific situation you need hidden camera, and then we use it, but always with the permission of the editor-in-chief, as I am, for example. So they ask me, my people, if they can use it according to the codex of Czech TV, and we discuss it if it's really necessary. Because I don't think that people like it as well. They sometimes feel that it goes to the intimate kind of situation for the person, and I don't think that the public really likes it, and we need to be trustworthy, and we don't abuse that tool.
Okay, well, I agree with what colleague just said. Like we don't want to abuse it. We have in our editorial standards, it says like, we are not using it, so not using it except in exceptional situations. So the standard is not to use it. And I don't remember, like in Serbia, because we are basically online, we don't need picture. I think it's much more question for TV journalists, because they rely on having something that they can illustrate, the story. We don't rely so much. So no, we used it only once when we wanted to prove cheating in elections. So we used it to film basically the people putting ballots in the boxes. So that was one, and it wasn't targeting anyone personally. It was like filming the situation, and once we used it when the colleague in Romania was buying fake documents. So these are the only 2 cases in 10 years that I remember using it. Yeah.
And
Atlatszo.
Atlatszo.
Yeah, we
Atlatszo.
choose a name that can't be pronounced by any foreigners.
Thank you.
On purpose. So, yes.
That's one strategy. Yeah. Hidden camera and then unpronounceable names. Yes.
So we also very rarely use it. I agree with the others that it's only possible to use this when you have no other options. Only thing we use regularly is the camera drone, because usually this expensive real estate and other stuff is behind tall walls and fences, and we need to get through these fences. So the camera drone is regularly used. And sometimes we do, like we had an undercover reporter with, because there is a pro-government group in Hungary who regularly goes to Poland to support pro-government demonstrations there. So one of our colleagues joined this group and went with them to Poland to demonstrate for Kaczynski or whoever. So that was also not possible to do that report without going undercover. But usually, and the third thing we do, we have a leaking platform, so we encourage whistleblowers to send us stuff, and we have a Dropbox on Tor network, so it's a secure mailbox where you can send stuff, and the sender cannot be traced back, and a lot of funny things are mailed to us through this platform, but we rarely use that because it can't be verified. And also we have a limitation, because in the recent months there was a huge sex tape scandal in Hungary, and we have an ethical red line that we won't do private sex videos or stuff like that. We won't publish.
Okay. Are there any questions? Yes, please wait for the microphone. If you could present yourself and ask a question, and also refer to the people that you want to ask that question.
Sure. Arzu Geybullah, a freelance journalist from Azerbaijan. Thank you for a very interesting panel. I have a question and a comment. Question to Marek. Your experience with defamation sounds extremely familiar to myself personally. I've been defamed in pro-government media, on social networks, received my first death threat on Facebook. So quite a journey. And my question to you is, that extremely damaged my reputation as a journalist, especially a reputation that took years to build. No one really cared about the work that I did, but mostly was focused on that particular reason for the attack. So the question is how to retrace back that reputation, right? How do you prove to your audience that, you're not who you are presented to be? That's one. That's my question. Comment to Dragana about social networks. In Azerbaijan, we have a very similar issue with content takedowns or hacking attempts of Facebook accounts, and account takedowns. So it's not just content. And what we found really useful is we work with an organization called Access Now. They have a digital security helpline, so I just wanted to mention that.
I know that, but it still takes like a couple of days for your content to be retrieved. And in the news business, it's an old news, like 8 days later. So I would rather argue for not taking down the content than finding the ways to get it back.
Right.
Yeah.
And that brings me to my next comment, which is actually trying to develop a relationship with social networks, and that's extremely difficult. I've been trying to get an interview from them for the last 2.5 weeks, actually, precisely regarding that particular question of content takedown, because we've had a case in Azerbaijan, and they've avoided in every single response, and then they gave me a very generic response about their community standards and how many people they employ on the team and blah, blah, blah. So that's, I think, one of the conversations that need to happen, is that bringing these networks into this kind of environment where we can also have candid conversation with them. And there was one other thing that I wanted to mention, and that is when you use humor to deal with the attacks, I think there is a certain time that needs to pass from the moment that you are being subject to this form of attack until you start using humor. Because again, like in my particular case, you know, when I got my first death threat, I didn't really know how to respond. Like, do I laugh about this? Do I not take it seriously? And yeah, or like when you are threatened with rape or, you know, all other forms of harassment, like how do you look at this in a funny way, right? So it took me actually some time to start responding with humor, which is what I do now. But it was a journey as well. So yeah, that comment. And also about the investigations into the murdered journalist. I think this whole impunity situation, I think in Jan's case, it's quite remarkable how far it has come, as you mentioned. And we're only seeing the progress in, for instance, Daphne's case, right? Only now people are coming to the streets and demanding that the government officials behind the murder are held accountable. We haven't seen the same progress in Khashoggi case, for instance. It's mostly international organizations advocating. So I think the country context also matters quite a lot when it comes to impunity, especially in cases of murdered journalists. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. We had a very huge auditorium. We had very huge public watching our program. So before it started, like this smear campaign, and of course we lost something. We lost, I don't know how much, but we definitely lost the people who are in love with the Czech president, because we criticized the Czech president, and I understood that they loved me only because I criticized the right-wing parties. And that's something which is really included to the journalism, that always some people would hate you, no matter if you are correct, yeah, because they appreciate you only when they criticize the people they don't like. And when it's their new government and you are doing still the same, you are doing your job, which is to control the politicians, they will hate you now, because they are the people who love. And then you have to come to these terms and not take it too seriously. After a while, some of them will appreciate that you were right. It happened to me in, for example, cases we are really following for at least 5 years. When we started with the stories about the conflict of interest of the Prime Minister, he was Minister for Finance at that time. People didn't know anything about the conflict of interest because it's quite like difficult issue. You need to be more educated to understand that in the law, in political science, for example, to understand the democracy, the basic of democracy. And you have a lot of people who don't understand those things. And but some of them will understand after a while, because people are quite, how to say it, conform, yeah? They will understand when the neighbor understand as well. And you have to be prepared for that sometimes you are not understood at the beginning, but you just have to keep going, and you have to be accurate, and you have to be honest, and some of those people will go back to you after a while when they see that you really prove to be correct. So that's my advice. Don't take it too seriously. And if you did it the best you should, that's okay.
Any more questions? Yes.
Thank you very much, Andrzej Kołka from Slovakia. I have a question. How often do you rely on leaks or tips? Because I talked to Slovak journalists, investigative journalists, they told me that 90% of their news are basically investigative reporting is based on leaks or tips from external sources. Is it the same in all these countries? And the second would be maybe the most interesting or most important investigative stories in your personal history or media history. maybe on the one hand, and on the other hand, those who have huge, the most significant impact on politics of society. That would be also interesting because this Czech case, as you now very nicely described, this would be my actually the third question, but you already answered it. He said, well, it evolved over time, right? It's now culminating maybe right now, so it's very interesting. I just wonder, did you say that it was initiated by the Czech public TV investigator reporting this case, or somebody else? Because it looked like
some of them, yes, but
Yeah?
he has so many cases that you have to be particular which one. Yeah,
But
Because as he counts that we broadcast more than 50 stories about him, and I think he's right. But I don't know. Some of them were really the first.
Thank you.
So there were two questions now. How often do you use leaks and tips? And the second question, most important and most significant investigative reporting in the history of your media while you were there. So Tamás.
Okay, so I don't think 90% of our stories comes from leaks. It's less than that. And also leaks are not enough in alone. You need to research them, validate them. You need to send journalists and verify the contents of the leaks. And the important story, I would mention the son-in-law of the Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán. He's a business person, and already in 2013 we started to write about a company which he was owner. So he owned a company which was very successful on EU tenders of renewal of public lighting in rural municipalities in Hungary, and I guess dozens of municipalities, of course governing party-led municipalities, all found this company to be the best to change the public lighting on EU money. And based on our articles, there an Olaf investigation started, and the Olaf investigation said that these tenders were rigged, these were not real competition, and at the end, Hungary had to pay back 40 million euros of EU subsidies because of these rigged tenders. And the sad part of it is that the Hungarian authorities didn't investigate how the son-in-law of the Prime Minister became so successful on these tenders.
Well, that's the real strength of EU, because those companies then moved into the public-private partnerships and doing this business in Serbia now. So this is interesting. Like this group of Hungarian companies are now signing with our local municipalities, public-private partnerships for changing like the street lights all around the Serbia, and we don't have Olaf or European money, so it's not going to be investigated. And that's quite important because like when you're in EU, then you have the institutions that are overseeing like the situation in Serbia. We don't have that. So no, we don't have the story that has, changed the government. But I will just mention a couple of, let's say, paradigmatic cases. Like the first case that I would really say was important, that is investigation about the misuse of World Bank money in 2015 in reconstruction of one mine after the floodings that we had in Serbia, and that was the story that has put us on the spotlight as traitors. Like that was the story after which Vučić, at that time Prime Minister, now President of Serbia, had a press conference in which he actually defended, like felt that he has to defend his government. For us, that was the sign that we did the right thing. And I'm sure that this story will be investigated once they are out of power, because we already have this experience with the previous government. So when we had the previous government, during their rule, none of our story was taken by the prosecution and investigated. But after the government was changed, like the current government used a lot of our reporting actually to run the cases after their political opponents. And just briefly, on the topic of why it is important to do the follow-ups. Like, basically, I would use the example of the arm trading story and how Serbian arm was basically traded into like Saudi Arabia and then to different conflict zones around the world. So that was the story that we actually started following in 2015, 16, randomly, when we had some information and so on and so forth. Like in 2018, we got the package of documents from a whistleblower from state manufacturer, because he knew we are on the topic and he knew we are following the topic. So we published through 2018, beginning of 19, the story, and and it is progressing, like more and more we're onto it. Like every week we have a story about it because more and more people are open now to speak about it. So that's why it is so important to be on the topic, to be recognized as someone who is pushing that. But I also want to raise concern about the fact that the guy who is actually a whistleblower and who supplied these documents to journalists actually is in the house arrest at the moment, and the government is denying him whistleblower status.
Marek, you have the last word, then we have to top up and finish.
They said everything. I would not add anything, but I got another answer for the lady there. She asked about how to deal with the hatred. You know, I learned from the young people as well how to treat it, because they feel that when they are hated, they are really popular. We have so many people on YouTube, for example, they praise themselves that they have so many enemies. And I started to think about it and said, okay, there is at some point when you yes, you are doing something good. You know, I think Ronald Reagan said it, that there is no positive and negative advertising. There is only advertising. So if people say publicly something about you, they say they do some advertising for you as well. So don't take it so seriously.
Thank you very much. I hope it has been empowering for all the reporters and investigative journalists present who also face the defamation and personal harassment in connection with their job. Thank you all my guests, Tamás, Bodoky, Dragana, Zarkovic, Obradovic and Marek Wollner for joining us. We have been talking about investigative reporting in the time of social networks and quick and easy technologies, but also in the change setting where the journalistic profession has moved from the top prestigious jobs down to, let's say, the drain system of the job people can do, and how to face it, how to deal with it. Thank you for being such an attentive